The sun, a relentless, bleached eye in the vast, indifferent sky, beat down on the skeletal remains of Redemption Gulch. Dust, the color of old blood and forgotten dreams, coated everything. The warped planks of the general store, the gaping maw of the saloon, the rusted chassis of a Model T slumped like a defeated warrior. It was a town that time had not just forgotten, but actively erased, leaving behind only echoes and whispers. And me. I was the only living, breathing soul in this graveyard of ambition. My boots crunched on the gravelly path, each step a defiant intrusion into the profound silence. I'd come here on a whim, a desperate need to escape the suffocating hum of modern life, the constant barrage of notifications, the curated perfection of social media. I craved the raw, unvarnished truth of a place stripped bare. Redemption Gulch, according to the faded, hand-painted sign I'd passed miles back, was precisely that. The air, thin and dry, tasted of baked earth and something else. A faint metallic tang, like old pennies or dried tears. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant reminder of the town's lingering melancholy. I breathed it in, a strange communion with the past. My fingers, calloused from years of tinkering with engines and playing guitar, itched to touch, to feel the texture of this forgotten world. The general store's porch sagged precariously, its railing splintered. I reached out, my fingertips brushing against a rough, weathered plank. It was surprisingly cool, despite the inferno of the sun, a testament to its age and the resilience of its wood. I traced the grain, imagining the rough hands that had built this place, the laughter and arguments that had echoed through its empty rooms. That's when I heard it. A sound so out of place it jolted me like a live wire, a sharp, indignant tsk. I whipped around, my heart hammering against my ribs. The saloon doors, ajar and swaying slightly in a phantom breeze, revealed a sliver of darkness within. But the sound hadn't come from there. It had come from behind. Me. Standing near the edge of the road, by a fence that sagged like a tired sigh, was a woman. Or what I assumed was a woman. She was draped in a voluminous khaki-colored dress that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. A wide-brimmed hat, also khaki, obscured most of her face, casting a deep shadow. Her posture was ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked like a statue carved from dust and disapproval. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding unnervingly loud in the stillness. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her gaze, I felt it, was fixed on me. It was a palpable pressure, like the heat of the sun intensifying. Did you say something?" I ventured again, feeling a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. Finally she spoke. Her voice was a thin, reedy sound, like wind whistling through a cracked pane of glass. "I did," she stated, her tone laced with an almost theatrical offense. "And I believe you heard me." I frowned, my initial curiosity morphing into bewilderment. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you clearly. The wind—" I gestured vaguely. "The wind is not the issue," she interrupted, her voice gaining a sharper edge. "Your actions are the issue." "My actions?" I looked down at my hands, still resting on the porch railing. I was just touching the wood. It's an old building." Her head tilted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a sharp, angular chin beneath the brim of her hat. "Touching. Yes, you were touching." She paused, letting the word hang in the air like a brand. "And what exactly do you believe you were touching?" This was getting bizarre. "Just wood. An old fence post, I guess, if I'd been closer to the fence." I gestured towards the sagging barrier she stood near. It was indeed a collection of decrepit posts and wire, offering little in the way of actual containment. Her shoulders stiffened. "A fence post," she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "You were touching an old fence post, and you call that innocent?" I blinked. "Yes. I mean, it's a fence post. It's been here for however long this town has been here." A flicker of amusement, quickly suppressed, danced at the corners of my mind. Was this some kind of performance art? A local eccentric? "And you, a stranger, a fleeting visitor, have the audacity to lay your hands upon it?" Her voice rose, the reedy sound gaining a surprising volume. "Without permission? Permission? To touch a derelict fence post in a ghost town?" I felt a laugh bubble up, but it died before it reached my lips. Her intensity was unnerving. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my tone placating. "I didn't realize I needed permission to touch things. This is a ghost town, isn't it? Isn't the point that it's abandoned?" "Abandoned, perhaps," she conceded, her voice a low hiss. "But not forgotten. And certainly not to be defiled by the likes of you." "Defiled?" I was touching a fence post. My fingers were covered in dust, yes, but I wasn't exactly leaving a trail of destruction. "I'm not defiling anything," I said, my patience beginning to fray. "I'm just experiencing the place, feeling the history." Her gaze narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a sliver of her face. Her eyes, set deep within the shadow of her hat, were a startling glacial blue. They held a fierce, almost fanatical gleam. "Feeling the history?" she scoffed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "You have no right to feel the history. You have no claim to it. You are an interloper, a tourist trampling through sacred ground." "Sacred ground?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "It's a bunch of rotting wood and collapsed buildings." "And those rotting wood and collapsed buildings," she declared, her voice now a furious whisper that seemed to carry further than any shout, "are the remnants of lives lived, of dreams pursued, of sacrifices made. They are tangible connections to a past that you, with your modern sensibilities and your insatiable curiosity, are attempting to exploit." I took a step back, my mind reeling. This was beyond eccentric. This was something else entirely. "Exploit?" I sputtered. "I'm not exploiting anything. I'm just looking around." "Looking around is one thing," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet menacing tone. "But touching is an act of appropriation. It's an assertion of ownership. And you, sir, have no ownership here." She took a step towards me, her shadow elongating across the dusty road. The hat still obscured her face, but the intensity of her presence was undeniable. "You are accusing me of touching an old fence post," I said, the absurdity of the situation finally hitting me full force. "And you're calling it— what did you call it?" "Unauthorized nostalgia," she stated, her voice resonating with a chilling finality. The words hung in the air, alien and unsettling. Unauthorized nostalgia. I had never heard such a phrase in my life. It sounded like something ripped from a dystopian novel, or perhaps a particularly bizarre academic paper. "Unauthorized nostalgia," I repeated, testing the words. "What does that even mean?" "It means," she said, her glacial blue eyes seeming to bore into me even through the shadow, "that you are attempting to borrow feelings, memories, and experiences that do not belong to you. You are trying to feel the nostalgia of this place, the longing for what once was, without having earned it, without having lived it." I stared at her, dumbfounded. My desire to connect with the past, to feel the weight of history in my hands, was being labeled as some kind of intellectual theft. "So, I'm not allowed to feel anything when I'm here?" I asked, my voice laced with a mixture of incredulity and a growing, unsettling fear. "You are allowed to observe," she corrected, her voice still sharp. "You are allowed to witness, but you are not allowed to appropriate. You are not allowed to engage in unauthorized nostalgia." She gestured with a long, bony finger towards the fence post I had inadvertently touched. "That fence post," she declared, her voice resonating with a strange, mournful authority, "holds the echoes of 1,000 goodbyes. It has witnessed the departures of men who went off to war, of families seeking a new life, of lovers parting under a sky that promised reunion but delivered only silence. To touch it without understanding that weight, without having a personal connection to those farewells, is to trivialize their sorrow, their hope, their very existence." My mind struggled to process her words. She wasn't just some crazy old woman. There was a method to her madness, a twisted logic born of, what? Loneliness? Grief? A profound, almost fanatical devotion to this dead town? "But I didn't know," I stammered. "I had no idea it was so significant." "Ignorance is no excuse," she retorted, her voice hardening, "especially when it leads to such blatant disrespect." I looked at the fence post again. It was just a piece of weathered wood, gray and splintered. But in her eyes, it was a reliquary, a sacred artifact. And I, with my casual touch, had committed a grievous sin. The sun beat down, relentless. The silence of Redemption Gulch seemed to deepen, to press in on me. I felt a prickle of sweat on my brow, not just from the heat, but from the sheer, unadulterated weirdness of the encounter. I apologize," I said, the words feeling inadequate, hollow. "I truly didn't mean any disrespect. I'm drawn to old places." She remained silent for a moment, her gaze unwavering. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the saloon. The saloon doors, as if on cue, creaked shut behind her, leaving me alone once more in the oppressive silence. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still tingling from its brief contact with the fence post. Unauthorized nostalgia. The phrase echoed in my mind, a bizarre, unsettling accusation. I had come to Redemption Gulch seeking an escape, a connection to something real and raw. I had found it, but not in the way I had expected. I had found it in the form of a spectral guardian, a self-appointed curator of forgotten emotions, who had accused me of stealing feelings I didn't even know I was capable of having. The desert wind, carrying the scent of dust and decay, whispered around me, and for the first time, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the heat. I had touched a fence post, and in doing so, I had stumbled into a story far stranger and more profound than I could have ever imagined. The saloon doors, ajar and swaying slightly in a phantom breeze, creaked a mournful protest. Karen disappeared through them, a voluminous shadow swallowed by the gaping maw of the building. I stood frozen, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that speared through the broken windows of the surrounding structures. My hand, still tingling from the brief contact with the fence post, felt strangely numb. Unauthorized nostalgia. The phrase echoed in the vast, oppressive silence, a nonsensical accusation that had somehow landed with the weight of a judgment. What did it even mean? Nostalgia was a feeling, a personal yearning for the past. How could one indulge in it without permission? Was there a permit office I'd missed? A historical society that issued temporal visas? The absurdity of it all warred with the unnerving intensity of Karen's gaze, that glacial blue fire that had seemed to bore into my very soul. She hadn't just been annoyed. She'd been incandescent with a righteous fury, as if I'd defaced a sacred artifact, not brushed my palm against a splintered piece of wood. I looked back at the fence post. It was nothing remarkable. Weather-beaten, bleached by decades of sun, its rough surface scarred with the marks of time and countless phantom touches. It was just old. A relic. The kind of thing I'd come here to find, to connect with, to feel the tangible reality of lives lived long before my own. But Karen had framed it differently. She'd implied the post held something more than just wood and rust. It held memories, emotions, the very essence of the people who had once walked these dusty streets. And I, a fleeting visitor, had dared to trespass on that emotional territory without her, or the town's, explicit consent. A shiver, unrelated to the desert heat, traced its way down my spine. This wasn't just a ghost town. It was a town with a ghost, or at least a guardian, and she was fiercely protective. I'd come here seeking an escape from the relentless, curated perfection of modern life, from the manufactured experiences and the digital echoes of existence. I'd wanted something raw, unvarnished, something that felt real. And I had found it, though not in the way I'd anticipated. My gaze swept across the deserted main street. The general store, its sign faded to illegibility, sagged like a tired sigh. Across the way, the skeletal remains of what might have been a livery stable stood open to the sky, its roof long since surrendered to gravity. Each building whispered of abandonment, of lives abruptly halted. But Karen had spoken of them not as empty shells, but as vessels, brimming with a spectral life that only she seemed privy to. Hesitantly, I took a step away from the fence post, my boots crunching on the baked earth. The sound seemed unnervingly loud in the profound stillness. It felt like I was treading on hallowed ground, not just dusty soil. I glanced back at the saloon doors, half expecting Karen to reappear, another accusation poised on her lips. But there was only the silence, broken only by the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the desert itself. I had to know more. The sheer strangeness of the encounter compelled me. Was she a local, living in the shadow of this forgotten town? Or was she, in some way, as spectral as the buildings themselves? The idea was absurd, of course. She was a woman, flesh and blood, albeit one with an unnerving intensity and a peculiar vocabulary. But the desert had a way of playing tricks on the mind, of blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. With a deep breath, I made my way towards the saloon. The wooden planks beneath my feet groaned under my weight, each step a deliberate act of trespass. The air grew heavier as I approached, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang of something long ago spilled. The saloon doors, which had seemed merely ajar before, now appeared to beckon me into the darkness. Pushing them open, I stepped inside. The interior was a tableau of arrested decay. Dust lay thick on every surface, a soft gray blanket muffling the sharp edges of memory. The air was cool, a welcome respite from the inferno outside, but it was also stagnant, heavy with the scent of stale whiskey and something else. Something indefinable, like the phantom perfume of a long-vanished dance. Sunlight, filtered through grime-caked windows, illuminated the room in hazy shafts. A long, dark bar stretched across one side, its surface scarred and stained. Rows of empty bottles, their labels long since faded, lined the shelves behind it. Tables and chairs, some overturned, were scattered across the floor, testaments to a hasty departure or a violent end. It was a scene straight out of a Western, a cliché made real by the passage of time. And then I saw her. Karen stood at the far end of the bar, her back to me. She was pouring a shot of amber liquid from a dusty bottle into a chipped glass. She moved with a deliberate, almost ritualistic grace, her movements precise, unhurried. She hadn't heard me enter, or perhaps she simply didn't care. The voluminous hat still obscured her face, leaving her an enigma. I cleared my throat, the sound startlingly loud in the hushed interior. She didn't flinch, didn't turn. She simply raised the glass to her lips and took a slow, measured sip. "You followed me," she stated, her voice still that thin, reedy sound, but now carrying an undercurrent of something far more dangerous. It wasn't a question. I wanted to understand," I replied, my voice feeling suddenly rough, inadequate. "What you meant? About the fence post? About unauthorized nostalgia?" She set the glass down with a soft clink. Then, slowly, she turned. Her face was still partially obscured by the shadow of her hat, but I could see more of it now. Her skin was weathered, etched with lines that spoke of hardship and sun. Her lips were thin, pressed into a firm line, and her eyes, those glacial blue eyes, set deep within the shadows, were fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. They held that same fierce, almost fanatical gleam I'd seen before, amplified now by the close confines of the saloon. "Understand?" she scoffed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "You think this is something to be understood? It's not a puzzle, dearie. It's a feeling, a weight, a legacy." She gestured with a gloved hand towards the room around us. "These walls have heard laughter and tears. They've seen fortunes made and lost. They've borne witness to love and betrayal, to hope and despair. The dust on this floor isn't just dirt. It's the pulverized remains of dreams. Every splinter in that bar, every crack in that glass, holds a fragment of a story. And you come here, a stranger, and you want to feel it all, just like that?" She snapped her fingers, the sound sharp and decisive. "You want to dip your fingers into the past, to taste its sweetness or its sorrow, without having lived it, without having earned it. That's not appreciation. That's appropriation. It's theft." "But I didn't take anything," I protested, feeling a surge of frustration. "I just touched a fence post. I'm interested in history. I want to learn." "Interest is a fleeting thing," she said, her voice hardening. "History is not a spectacle for your amusement. It's a delicate ecosystem of memory and emotion. You can't just wander in, a tourist of the soul, and expect to absorb it all without consequence. Some things need to be respected. Some things need to be left undisturbed." She took another sip of her drink, her gaze never leaving mine. "That fence post," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "was where Silas stood when he watched his wife leave on the stagecoach for the last time. He never saw her again. You think a casual touch from a stranger can comprehend that kind of heartbreak? You think your modern sensibilities can even grasp the depth of his loss?" My mind reeled. Silas. His wife. The stagecoach. These were not abstract historical facts. They were tangible, emotional anchors that Karen seemed to carry with her. She was not just a guardian of the town. She was a living repository of its sorrow. "How do you know all this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. "I listen," she said simply. "This town, it speaks to those who are willing to hear, and I've been listening for a very long time." She turned back to the bar, her silhouette stark against the dusty light. "You came here looking for an escape," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "But you found something else, didn't you? You found that the past isn't dead. It's just waiting." I stood there, caught between the palpable weight of her words and the surreal reality of the situation. The silence of the saloon pressed in on me, No longer just an absence of sound, but a presence, thick with unspoken stories. I had come to Redemption Gulch seeking a quiet escape, a connection to a simpler time. Instead, I had stumbled into a consciousness, a living monument to a past that refused to stay buried. And the guardian of that past, a woman named Karen, had just accused me of the most peculiar crime imaginable. I didn't know if I should be terrified or fascinated. Perhaps in this ghost town, those two emotions were inextricably linked. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my journey into the heart of Redemption Gulch had only just begun. I hadn't just touched an old fence post. I had inadvertently knocked on the door of a history that was very much alive. The saloon doors, ajar and swaying slightly in a phantom breeze, creaked a mournful duet as Karen pushed them wider. I followed, the crunch of my boots on the packed dirt floor an intrusion into a silence that felt as thick and dusty as the air itself. Inside, the gloom was profound, broken only by shafts of light that pierced the grime-caked windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing like spectral revelers. The scent of stale whiskey, dried blood, and something indefinably melancholic hung heavy, a perfume of forgotten nights and shattered dreams. Karen moved with a surprising grace for someone who seemed so brittle, her shadow stretching long and distorted across the warped planks of the floor. She gestured with a bone-thin hand toward a collection of rickety chairs arranged around a scarred mahogany bar. "Sit," she commanded, her voice still that reedy rasp, but now underscored by a new intensity, a fervor that made the hairs on my arms prickle. I took a seat at a table near the back, the wood cool and rough beneath my fingertips. My mind, still reeling from the unauthorized nostalgia accusation, struggled to process the scene. This wasn't just a collection of decaying buildings. It was, according to Karen, a repository of raw, unvarnished emotion, a place where the past clung to every surface like a second skin. And I, a fleeting visitor with no claim, had dared to touch it. Karen, meanwhile, had disappeared behind the bar, rummaging through unseen depths. A moment later, she reappeared, holding 2 chipped tin mugs. She placed one before me, the metallic tang of old metal mingling with the pervasive scent of dust. The other she held, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the bar, as if communing with an invisible patron. "Silas," she began, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He stood right there, by that post. Every single day for a year he watched the horizon. His wife, Eleanor, she'd packed her bags, promised she'd be back. Said she was going to see her sister in Tucson, just for a spell. He never doubted her, not at first." She took a slow, deliberate sip from her mug, her eyes never leaving their distant focus. I watched her, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Her conviction was absolute, her bearing that of a priestess tending a sacred flame. "But the weeks turned into months," she continued, her voice gaining a somber cadence. "The sun beat down, baking the earth, bleaching the wood. The tumbleweeds rolled past like silent mourners. Silas, he just kept watching. His hands, calloused from working the mines, would grip that post until his knuckles were white. He'd say her name, like a prayer, like a curse. The dust, the heat, the gnawing emptiness in his gut. It all seeped into that wood, into that ground." She finally lowered her gaze, her glacial blue eyes locking onto mine. There was a depth to them, a reflection of 1,000 sunsets and 1,000 heartbreaks. He never saw her again. She never came back. He stayed, you know. Kept that little claim. Kept tending his mine. But his heart stayed right there, by that fence post, waiting for a ghost. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint, persistent hum of the desert wind outside. I felt a strange sensation, as if the very air in the saloon was vibrating with unspoken grief. It was a palpable pressure, an almost physical weight of sorrow. "And you," Karen said, her voice sharpening, shattering the reverie. "You touch that post, and you feel—" What? A vague sense of antiquity? A fleeting curiosity? You appropriate his waiting, his despair? You take a piece of his suffering, a piece of his life, and you package it up as a story for yourself. That's not appreciation. That's theft. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I didn't mean any disrespect, I stammered, the words feeling woefully inadequate. I'm drawn to old places, to the stories they hold. Karen let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Stories? You think history is just a collection of quaint anecdotes to be consumed over a latte? This town isn't a museum, sir. It's a graveyard. And every object, every shadow, is an epitaph. Silas's pain isn't an exhibit. It's a living scar on the land. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw her face more clearly. The hat still shadowed her eyes, but the lines etched around her mouth spoke of a life lived in harsh sun and harder times. Her skin was weathered, like ancient leather, and her lips were thin and taut. She looked less like a woman and more like a force of nature, a guardian sculpted by the very elements she described. You come here, a stranger, with your clean hands and your easy conscience, and you presume to feel the past. You think a moment's touch is enough to understand the weight of a lifetime of longing, the gnawing fear of abandonment, the slow decay of hope? Her voice rose, the reedy sound gaining a surprising volume, echoing in the cavernous space. You think you can just dip your toe into the river of time and call yourself a swimmer? I felt a flush of defensiveness creep up my neck, warring with the undeniable truth of her words. I had been casual. I had been a tourist in their sorrow. My desire to escape the superficiality of my own life had led me here, seeking a connection, an authenticity I felt was missing. But Karen's fervor, her absolute unwavering belief, made my quest feel suddenly shallow, almost vulgar. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just look? Just observe from a distance?" Karen scoffed. "Observation is a start, but true understanding, that requires a different kind of listening. You have to open yourself up. You have to let the silence speak. You have to bear witness, not just to the grand gestures, but to the lingering echoes, the whispers in the wind, the dust motes dancing in the light. They all carry the weight of what was." She gestured around the saloon. "This place, it remembers every argument, every toast, every clandestine whisper. The wood remembers the sweat of the miners, the tears of the saloon girls, the desperation of the gamblers. And Silas's fence post, that post remembers the very moment his world broke." She paused, her gaze sweeping over me, assessing. "You came here seeking something. I can see it in your eyes. A hunger. But you were looking for comfort, for a romanticized past. You weren't prepared for the raw, unvarnished truth of it. The pain, the loss, the sheer, unrelenting weight of human experience." I sat in stunned silence, the tin mug growing cold in my hands. The oppressive heat of the desert outside seemed to have seeped into the saloon, making the air thick and heavy. I had come to Redemption Gulch looking for an escape, for a tangible connection to a bygone era. Instead, I had found myself in a surreal confrontation, accused of a crime I hadn't even known existed. Unauthorized nostalgia. Karen's words hung in the air, each syllable a carefully placed stone in the foundation of her belief system. She wasn't just a woman guarding a ghost town. She was a living embodiment of its sorrow, a curator of its spectral memories. And I, with my innocent touch, had trespassed into her sacred charge. "So what happens now?" I finally managed to ask, the question feeling both insignificant and of paramount importance. My desire to explore, to experience this place had been met with a stern, almost fanatical guardian. Karen's expression softened, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her glacial blue eyes. "Now," she said, her voice returning to that low, melodic tone. "You decide. Do you leave and carry the weight of your transgression with you? Or do you stay and learn to listen? Truly listen. Not with your ears, but with your soul. Do you learn to respect the echoes, or do you continue to trample on them?" She turned away then, walking towards the back of the saloon, her silhouette disappearing into the deeper shadows. "I will be here," she called back, her voice fading. "When you are ready to ask for permission." Not from me. From them. I looked down at the chipped tin mug, the faint scent of old metal a stark contrast to the rich, complex aroma of the saloon. My initial excitement had been replaced by a profound sense of unease, a dawning realization that this ghost town was far more than just a collection of decaying buildings. It was a place where history wasn't just remembered, but felt. And I had stumbled into its emotional core, a trespasser in a land of spectral grief, with a guardian who demanded not just respect, but a deep, soul-bearing reverence. The desert sun beat down relentlessly outside, but within the saloon, a different kind of heat, the heat of unspoken sorrow, was the true inferno. I had come seeking authenticity, and I had found it, but it was a far more demanding and terrifying thing than I had ever imagined. The fence post, a simple piece of weathered wood, now felt like a portal, and I was caught between worlds, unsure which step to take next, or if I even had the right to take any at all. The silence that followed Karen's pronouncement wasn't the gentle, dusty quiet of an abandoned place. It was a charged, expectant hush, as if the very air of Redemption Gulch held its breath. Her glacial blue eyes, sharp and unyielding, bored into me, demanding an answer, a confession, a surrender. I stood there, my hand still hovering a few inches from the splintered wood of Silas's fence post, feeling like a trespasser, not just on private property, but on something far more sacred. "Permission," I echoed, the word feeling absurdly inadequate, a flimsy shield against the weight of her accusation. Permission to feel the rough grain of wood beneath my fingertips? Permission to connect, however fleetingly, with a past that had carved itself into the very bones of this town. It sounded preposterous, even to my own ears. Karen's lips, a thin, unsmiling line, tightened. Permission to feel, to borrow, to imprint yourself upon a sorrow that isn't yours. Silas's sorrow, this town's sorrow. Her voice, though quiet, carried the same chilling resonance as the wind in the abandoned telegraph office. "You think history is just old buildings and rusted metal, don't you? A backdrop for your escapades. You think you can dip your fingers into the well of human experience whenever you please, without consequence, without understanding." I finally lowered my hand, the phantom warmth of the wood fading. Her words, though accusatory, had a strange, almost poetic rhythm to them. She wasn't just a madwoman guarding a ghost town. She was a priestess, a keeper of a sacred, mournful flame. I looked around, and for the first time, the derelict buildings didn't seem merely picturesque in their decay. The sagging porch of the general store seemed to sag with a weary sigh. The gaping maw of the saloon, its doors askew, felt like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. The skeletal remains of a wagon wheel, half buried in the dust, looked like a forgotten monument to a desperate journey. I I didn't mean to disrespect anything, I stammered, my voice feeling thin and reedy, just as she'd described the wind. I wanted to feel it, to imagine what it was like, to escape the noise. The noise, she repeated, a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Pity? Scorn in her tone. You think your world is noisy? You think it's full of things? This town is a symphony of silence, a testament to what happens when the noise stops. And what remains are the echoes, the vibrations, the grief. She gestured with a gloved hand, her movements precise and deliberate. Silas stood here, day after day. The sun beat down, the wind whipped around him, and his heart ached with a loneliness so profound it seeped into the very wood of this post. He poured his hope, his despair, his unanswered prayers into it. And you, a fleeting visitor, a tourist of emotion, you touch it. And what do? You take a photograph in your mind. You feel a pang. And then you move on, leaving the echo undisturbed, or worse, you disturb it with your own fleeting sentiment. I swallowed, the dust in my throat suddenly feeling like coarse grit. She was right, in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. My desire to escape the relentless barrage of modern life, the constant connectivity, the manufactured experiences, had led me here, seeking something raw and real. But I hadn't anticipated that raw and real could have such a potent, almost sentient presence. I hadn't considered that the past wasn't just a story to be read, but a living, breathing entity with emotions that could still resonate. So what am I supposed to do? I asked, my gaze flicking between her intense face and the silent fence post. Just look? Never touch? Never wonder? Wonder, yes, she conceded, her voice softening ever so slightly, though the intensity of her gaze did not waver. Wonder is the beginning. But wonder must be tempered with reverence, with acknowledgement. You don't just feel Silas's sorrow. You witness it. You honor it. You understand that it is a part of the fabric of this place, a thread woven with pain and perseverance. And to truly touch it, you must first understand the weight of that thread. She took a slow step towards me, and the voluminous fabric of her skirt whispered against the dry earth. You came here seeking authenticity, a respite from the curated perfection of your own time. But authenticity isn't a commodity to be consumed. It is a truth to be absorbed, to be lived with. And this town, this desiccated husk of a place, it demands more than a casual glance. It demands respect. It demands that you listen, truly listen. I looked at her, this spectral guardian of forgotten griefs. Her face, framed by the wide brim of her hat, was etched with lines that spoke of a life lived in the relentless sun, but also of a deep, internal solitude. She seemed less like a resident of the present, and more like an apparition herself, tethered to the past by an invisible, unbreakable cord. How do you do it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How do you listen? A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was fleeting, like a shadow passing over the sun, but it was there. You stop trying to impose your own narrative. You quiet the incessant chatter in your own mind. You let the stillness speak. You let the dust settle, not just on the buildings, but within yourself. And then, if you are patient, if you are open, you begin to hear the whispers, the sighs, the stories that time tried to erase, but couldn't quite silence. She gestured again, this time towards the cluster of buildings that made up the heart of